On enchaîne avec une keynote sur le futur du retail média. On va switcher d'ailleurs, je crois, en anglais avec Daniel Knapp. Please welcome donc Daniel Knapp, chef économiste d'IAB Europe. Welcome Daniel. It's your time.
Good afternoon and a very warm welcome everybody. We're switching to English for this session after we heard about regulation and a lot of complex issues. I want to speak about what's probably the third revolution in digital advertising, the rise of retail media, commerce media, merchant media. We're not really clear on the terms, but the market is already in the billions. What always happens when you have a new ad category is that growth is hyped. But we need to really embed this growth into numbers, empirical data to see how can we jointly develop this market. It's particularly interesting to speak about this in France because this market is one of the most advanced in Europe when it comes to standards and definitions and really bringing this market forward. But today I want to bring to you a few statistics to help us understand the market, its potential, and what needs to happen next to really unlock it all. So, before we start, I need to give some context, because we live in very particular times. We are in the polycrisis. Welcome. This is not good news. What you can see here is a lot of crises that are influencing us currently. And you see these different arrows here, and the Germans have a lovely term for depicting this dystopia called Krisenbilder, or crisis pictures. The polycrisis is different from other economic recessions. It is not monocausal, right? We had the Lehman crash, we had the Eurozone crisis, we had the dot-com crash. This is different because we have many different crises happening at once and not in isolation, but they are co-constituting each other and they're augmenting each other. That makes it very hard for us to understand what's really going to happen next year and the year after, and sparks huge uncertainty in digital advertising. And this is something very important to consider in the domain of retail media as, of course, the ability to target using first-party data and to combine ad exposure and attribution and conversion into a single platform really helps to mitigate some of these polycrisis concerns that we have today. But we're not living just in times of cyclical disruptions as macroeconomic crises often are, but we also live in a time of complete re-engineering and re-architecting of the digital advertising world that we have come to know over the last decades. We heard it at this conference, post-cookies, Apple ATT, and so forth. But let's zoom out a little bit. What does this mean more broadly? It means that privacy and competition, they usher in a new era of the internet. We need to split the internet out into splinters, into fragments, into shards. Welcome to the era of splinternet advertising, where increasingly we have different ecosystems with their own proprietary metrics and truths that are not fully interoperable. And even the so-called open web, sometimes a misnomer, is splitting into different subdomains, from the topics web to the ID web to the anonymous web and so forth. At the same time, this is an opportunity for new players to come into the market. And we're seeing the walled or hedged gardens, which are slightly more porous than walled gardens, rise in numbers. Pinterest, Snap, TikTok, with a layer like Shopify for transactions, but also, of course, the domain of CTV and retail media coming into this as well. And this world of post-third-party cookies and tracking complications, of signal loss more broadly, fuels these splinters, but also gives rise to new players. It's going to be our task to grow these little fragments and also find ways to reconnect them together. And I believe retail media has a crucial role to play in this. We can already see that things are changing. It's not as usual. If we dig into company quarterly results, here are the Q3 results of some of our usual suspects here, some are called big tech, we see a huge divergence, which we haven't seen in the years before, where some of the companies that used to propel growth in digital advertising are now growing single digit or not growing at all. And we can see Amazon as kind of the poster child, as the first company to usher in retail media, growing double-digit. We also see the Walmart results recently, where retail media ad spend was up more than 30%. With little reading on what European players are doing, but we can guarantee you that Carrefour, Leclerc, others in Rewe in Germany, Tesco in the UK also had strong double-digit growth at odds with what's happening at some of the big tech platforms. And really this growth shows this potential of these new splinters of gaining traction and share in the overall digital ad market. And we can already see, we look at some company results and their own proclamations. These are not my own forecasts as an economist, kind of what the opportunity is. Walmart made 2.1 billion with retail media advertising, expecting to make 4 billion by the end of 2024. And hang on, we're seeing some other companies on here that are not retailers. Instacart isn't a retailer, Uber isn't a retailer. What are those? They're of course marketplaces that sell goods of third parties and don't offer them themselves. They just provide transaction facilities. But they are also part of our retail media definition, or commerce media definition, and we see Instacart growing rapidly, Uber, of course, just launching in France, pushing ahead. We see many, many other launches happening. And of course, we can also see some European players in here, like Zalando, expecting to make 1 billion with retail media by 2025. So with all of this preamble, what's the market in Europe? What's it in France? What's it elsewhere? And what is its potential until where can it go? First, we need to think about where do the budgets come from? Where does retail media spend come from? And here things get tricky, because there are many different budget pools. Here's an example from the US. We have the same pools in Europe, but the distribution is uneven. Of course, we got organic growth in digital fueling things, but not that much anymore. In 2023, I'm predicting only 2.4% growth in digital ads in Europe, the lowest growth since IB Europe started tracking this market in 2006. We see a move from other channels, particular coming in from social and search into retail media. We're seeing some shift from traditional media, particular from print, some from TV, but that's not very pronounced in Europe. We can nearly ignore that. And there's all the trade budgets, which aren't ad budgets, they're other budgets, with other pools, other people, other agreements, which are also moving into this. Today in Europe, we predominantly have a shift in trade, and also we have a shift in digital budgets. But the different budget owners are very different. And we need to unlock the market, ensure that we have more harmonization across these budget pools to really fuel the fire of retail media. The largest players in this world are also not European. They're not sitting here in the room. Globally, it's an American and a Chinese play, with Alibaba, Amazon, JD, and others being the top retailers by online gross merchandise value, i.e. the amount of money being transacted on those marketplaces. With the top 20 in here, and where's Europe? Only one company of Europe is in the top 20, and that is Zalando. So globally, Europe doesn't really matter that much in this game. But if we zoom into Europe, we see a huge raft of strong endemic retailers, a hugely diverse landscape of retailers, French, German, UK-centric in particular, some Dutch players in here. These are the top retailers in Europe by online gross merchandise value. And we can already see that these are high volumes of merchandise here, which kind of puts them into highly competitive positions when it comes to overall digital sources of ad inventory, and also, of course, with loyalty schemes and other things, of data. And as I said, the European market is accelerating quickly, despite the macro headwinds and despite, or maybe even because of the structural change we're seeing in the market. So including Amazon, take these numbers thus with a grain of salt, including Amazon, we saw the market worth nearly 8 billion euros in 2021, and we expect that it's going to grow up to 25 billion in 2026. And you can see throughout this period, growth is double-digit despite the headwinds we're going to face in the next 2 years. And this is the fundamental point. Although we have been talking about retail media with growing attention, maybe for the last 18 months, it is, from a size perspective, not really an emerging channel anymore. Although we still need to define the stuff, build definitions of formats, of look-back windows, of measurement, interoperability between different retailers, all that still needs to be built. But overall already, we have a lot of spend in here. In 2021, the market was as big as newspaper print ads in Europe. And this 25 billion is also a crucial number because it's going to be as big as linear TV ads, excluding AVOD, excluding BVOD, excluding all digital extensions. But that number is important because television was the medium that grew the consumer economy since the 1950s and 60s. Mass media and mass brands built a symbiotic relationship to grow together. And we're now seeing retail media becoming as big as that, raising some very important questions about what's the future of brand building and how can the retail media portfolio add to this, not just from a conversion perspective. But to me, the real comparison is a different one. It's not really TV. The real comparison for me is search. Because both retail media and search are crisis kids. They showed their potential in times of economic volatility and high uncertainty. So clearly for search, the watershed moment, was the 2008 collapse of Lehman Brothers and the economic recession that followed. For retail media, it was the pandemic, the massive move towards e-commerce and the lots of different stores being built, etc., etc. And what I put here on a timeline is years since day one, in a sense, from year 0 to year 6, i.e. from when they really kicked into action, up to a 6-year forecast, how big are they going to be? And we can see retail media has an even different trajectory than search, which used to dominate digital advertising for maybe a decade. Of course, the market is bigger now. We're much more mature in digital advertising. But regardless, I think this chart here really shows the potential inherent in this market. To seize this opportunity, we need to ask, how are European retailers positioned? Because one thing I want to emphasize, forecasts do not make reality. They show where things can go, but we need to make this potential happen together. Already, we're seeing major players and many players ushering into this market. So we looked at 91 different retailers across all these different categories in the top 5 markets in Europe, including France. And we saw how many of the companies in a given sector already have a retail media offering available. And we can see there are already retail media first sectors where the vast majority of companies operating in this space do have an offer. Consumer electronics, for instance. We can see also fashion, omni sector in a sense, supermarkets, etc., being incredibly strong. And it's not just about whether an offering exists, but also how developed it is. So when we look at overall kind of supermarkets, shoppers, etc. in Europe more widely, we can see 58% do have a retail media offering. And if we say out of these 58%, how many of those have actually evolved it further and said we're building self-serve capabilities for advertisers and agencies to automatically, like programmatically, like we know on search, on social, to book in stuff automatically. 38% already have that, and that is really a demonstration of a further maturity of this market. Very interestingly is also what we see on the right side here. Because as I said, retail media isn't just about what's happening on the pages and the apps of retailers and marketplaces. It's a big question of what role in the value chain do these players really have? Are they buyers, or are they sellers, or are they both? And already many are eyeing opportunities off-site, i.e. using their own first-party data to target consumers elsewhere on the web or in other media higher up in the funnel to then measure the conversion back on the page for purchase. And this is going to become, as I'll show you in a second, one major growth area for retail media. So with all of these launches and additional services, how mature is the market? Where do we stand currently in the development if we just put these billions aside for a second? And how can we find this out? So here's a little exercise, because the data in this market is really, really scarce. And we can estimate things. So anonymized data here, but what we can see is there's a correlation between how much money someone makes on retail media and what the online gross merchandise value of that specific company is. We know the US data, we know the Zalando data and others, and we can put things into buckets, and that's exactly what we did. We looked at how long has an offering been on, how sophisticated is it, and so forth, and then estimated the share of online gross merchandise value, which is actually retail media. And we got a conservative bucket, a likely bucket, and for some, a really aggressive bucket. And on the next chart, I removed some of the company names here, but I think the picture is very clear. A lot of companies in Europe that we either modeled or have actual data for, they are in the nascent bucket, where retail media as share of online GMV is somewhere between 0 and 2%, often around this 1% mark. We see other players, in particular US players, further on the right of the screen. I removed Amazon here, Instacart as well, because it's 18% of online GMV, and also Allegro, the Polish platform, with 9% already. The most important thing to note, though, on this chart here is what's happening in the middle, the landing zone, the dark purple area. This is where retailers typically want to get to in 3 to 4 years, i.e. more than doubling the share of online gross merchandise value that really is capitalized via retail media. And this is very systematic and common among companies, which gives us additional confidence that we can leap into a more established market zone within our forecast period. Overall, if we benchmark things, the US is further ahead. So here we can look at market penetration, which means retail media overall for the entire market, a share of how much e-com revenue is being done in this market. Germany leads here, predominantly due to its high exposure to Amazon. And then we can see other markets as well. And although France is such a pioneer, the relatively lower share of Amazon in this market means that actually France has a greater headroom for growth than some of the other European markets assembled here. Overall, though, if we compare this to the US, we shouldn't say we are behind. It really shows how much potential there is to develop this market just from an arithmetic point of view. A lot of retail media for retailers is not just about media, it's also about profitability. So what you can see here is a chart that shows the profit margins for a whole range of different retailers, from luxury to supermarkets and so forth, and you can see how it tapers off into the tiny, tiny single digits. Let's abstract this. Let's remove luxury and look at this. Typically 3.8% profit margin. On-site retail media, much bigger, off-site as well. So moving from the business of selling bananas to the business of selling media is a huge thing. And many companies are already using these examples in their investor reports. And there was a remarkable meeting once at Amazon in 2017, one of the 2 annual leadership meetings, where Jeff Bezos asked a very innocent question, a seemingly innocent question. He asked his team, I wonder what profitability was by unit without advertising. And the executives couldn't answer the simple question. They had to scramble around, take their calculators out and figure this out, because they always had layered in advertising into the overall profit margin. They hadn't broken it out. And once they did this, a picture looked quite different. The company was not profitable without advertising. Advertising was subsidizing the entire retail operation. And as you can see on this chart here, that gap has even widened. Meaning advertising is not a nice add-on revenue stream, it's actually foundational for the business. This is something we see elsewhere as well. We all know about the last mile delivery companies that we see everywhere in Europe, in all big cities. And there's a big joke here, like on the meme on the left here, that many of those might not be so profitable after all, particularly now with heightened pressure after a lot of venture capital has been poured into them. And Instacart already makes 18% of its overall revenue from ads. Again, showing here that ads are not just a nice add-on, but again, instrumental to the whole overall business. I think lastly, we need to look about what advertisers want. And this is not just about media, but actually connecting retail and media more closely. We did a survey at IB Europe with advertisers, and we realized that apart from just looking at on and off-site media buying, many advertisers really want other things, insights, product development help. They want to use the feedback loop of ad insights and who buys the products based on ads to build better products. new chocolate bar flavors, and other things. I think this is really exciting because it brings the world of advertising and the world of product development much closer together. Real outcome-based media, as we have dreamed about for a decade. But for that to happen, some other things need to take place. That is, more access to actual online commerce data. Not just media data, but actually transaction data, which advertisers are demanding from retailers who are still very closely guarding their own data. And to conclude, I think it's very important to understand that we need to look at retail media in the broader value chain here. I think about unified data. What you can see on this chart here is a typical waterfall chart in e-commerce. You have your overall spend, you got your margins, etc. This is one bucket in here in the middle, SG&A, Services, General and Administration. That's where marketing sets in. In the world of signal loss that we have, of course, this gets more expensive. So when you have a platform where you can have ad exposure and conversion at the same time, of course you can reduce that. That means that potentially, if done well, retail media can increase the overall e-com profitability. And this means that I think we need to look at this market in a much wider manner than just media. And lump different markets together. There's marketing in there, and of course there's advertising in there. But I think we need to add shipping and rents, store rents, to the same market. Why? Because we have traditionally in advertising asked this question: what does it cost for my message to elicit a desired consumer response? Awareness, click, you name it. This was what we were focusing on in our business. But if we look at retail media and e-commerce, others in the value chain ask an entirely different question. What does it cost for my goods to reach the consumer? And smart retailers are already using particular off-site media to actually serve ads to people who, for product discounts and so forth, who live closer to the fulfillment center. So to bring together the ad value chain and the delivery value chain to increase profitability. And I think this is a huge step which really shows how two very distinct markets move together. The world of the CMO and the CFO are finally bridging together. As I said initially, for this to happen, we can't just rely on forecasts alone. We have to create this market. And standards, harmonization, simpler ways of buying, and also better ways of activating first-party data across the broader marketing funnel are essential tools to do that. And I would call on everybody in the industry to work together with us at the IAB, at Alliance Digitale across Europe, to really make this happen and ensure that this really becomes the third revolution in digital advertising. Thank you very much.